In this video, I'm going to show you how to download and install Android Studio, which is the program we're going to be using to write our Android applications. Now, just a reminder that this is the Windows video. So if you're running a Linux machine or working on a Mac, there is a separate video that you can follow along in this section to watch and install Android Studio for those operating systems. But if you're using Windows, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Alright, so we're going to open up a browser and we're going to go to developer.android.com. When you get to that page, we can scroll down a little bit and we can see Android Studio 2.2. I'm going to click on Get Android Studio. Notice that is a huge download. It's 1.6 gigabytes as of the time I'm shooting this video. So I'm going to click on that. Click on I've read and agree with the terms and conditions and start the download. Now, one thing to be aware of is that this new version of Android Studio, version 2.2, is very different to the previous version and has a number of new features that weren't actually available in an earlier version of Android Studio. Things like the new layout designer, for example. So you'll need to be using Android Studio 2.2 or higher for this course. Now, if you've already got Android Studio 2.1 installed, you'll still need to install the 2.2 version for this course. Now, I've created a separate video on updating or upgrading from Android Studio 2.1, so you may prefer to watch that video instead of this one. But keep in mind, if you are on Android Studio 2.1, it is actually quite a simple process, and Android Studio will prompt you to update to Android Studio 2.2. So it's quite a simple process and you shouldn't really have any problems if you're doing it that way. Alright, so obviously I'm installing Android Studio for the first time, so I'm going to let this download complete, and I'll pause the video and we'll come back once it's finished so that we can continue the installation. Now, we're just about finished with the downloading. We're at 5% to go. At this point, you want to check your browser to see that if there's a notice for Windows 10 Anniversary Update users. Now, this should be resolved by the end of September, as you can see on the screen there, at which point Google will release an update. But if you're affected, then you won't actually be able to install Haxum, which is needed for the x86 emulators to work. Now, if you don't understand what I've just said there with x86 and emulators, all will be revealed in future videos. But as of the date I'm shooting this video, which is getting close towards the end of September, I don't really recommend any of the workarounds that you find online if you are affected by this. Disabling secure boot in your BIOS is really a last resort, so you may be better off skipping to the Java tutorials in a later section of this course and coming back to this section once the update is available. And it won't actually affect your ability to use Android Studio. It just means that running the apps on the emulator will be incredibly slow until you can actually get this Haxum tool working. Alright, so you can see there now that the download's complete. Windows is running a security scan. Once that's finished, we should be able to run the installer and finish off this installation. Alright, so I'm going to click on Run now. So you'd obviously navigate, if you're not running Windows 10, you'd navigate to the folder where you downloaded and click on Run. And I'm going to close down the browser as well, so we don't really need that. I'm going to select Yes there do you want to allow this app to make changes to your PC? And now we're going to go through the install process now that we've downloaded it. So I'm going to click on Next. And I'm going to leave these two top options selected, given that we can't change the first one anyway. The third option, Android Virtual Device, I'm going to turn that off. And we can actually set up an Android Virtual Device, or also known as an emulator, in a later video. We don't need to do that right now. So click on Next. Click on I agree with the terms of the conditions or the agreement. And you can see the folder where it's going to be installing Android Studio, as well as the folder where it's going to be installing the Android SDK. So I'm going to leave those as the defaults and click on Next. Click on Install. So now it's going ahead and actually installing Android Studio as well as the software development kit. And I'll also try and install Haxum, which is this tool that I talked about to make emulators, or to be able to run emulators faster on your computer. So you may actually get this error about Haxum, but if you get something like that, don't worry too much, because it means that while you won't be able to take advantage of the Haxum acceleration features when you run your emulator, you will still be able to get things working. And I have got a future video in this section showing you how to actually use another emulator on your computer. So either way, you're going to be able to run the emulators, but hopefully if Haxum works for you, you're going to be able to run it much faster. And one other thing that might be worth checking out is that VTX is enabled in your computer's BIOS. And if that doesn't make sense to you, well, look, we have a look at that in the video in this section called Enable VTX in BIOS. Basically, that's something you may need to do on your computer to enable Haxum to be able to be set up and run. For now, though, if that's the only error that you see with Android Studio and the SDK is installed, then we can continue. So I'm going to go back now and just see how the installation is going ahead. Let's go back to that now. Alright, so you can see that it's still downloading and it's extracting the Android SDK. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back when it's just about done. Alright, so you can see now that the installation has completed, and I'm not sure whether I made it clear, but one of the reasons for the large download was that the Android Software Development Kit was actually bundled and included in that download. That's the reason that it was so large. Right, so let's click on Next. And now it's going to start Android Studio. Okay, so Android Studio is now installed and the installation is complete at this point in time. And again, if you did get an error about Haxum or something along those lines, don't worry about it. In the next video, we're going to be talking about that when we configure the Android Software Development Kit. And as I mentioned in the slide, it may be worthwhile you checking out the Enable VTX in BIOS video if you're having some issues, but check that out if needed. Alright, so in the next video, we're going to look at configuring Android Studio. The steps from this point on now are largely the same regardless of which operating system you're using, so skip over the next few videos that cover installing Java and the Android Studio on a Mac and Linux, and just go to the video titled Configure Android SDK on all three platforms. I'll see you in the next video.